Today on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast, we have a great interview with Peter Martin, the co-host of Saving the Game podcast and one of the players on the City on a Hill podcast. Plus, I announce the winner of last week's giveaway and announce what our grand prize giveaway is this week from +3 to Charisma. And we'll get to all of that right after this. I love working with other believers who enjoy their nerdy pursuits, and +3 to Charisma.com is one of my favorites. Producing top quality and affordable tabletop gaming supplies, owned and operated by a great Christian couple, they believe everyone should have the opportunity to have an epic gaming experience, because everyone needs a charisma boost. Check them out at +3 to Charisma.com. Christian Nerds Unite and +3 to Charisma are partnering together on a special giveaway, so stick around for the end of the show to hear how to enter. Now, back to the show. Welcome to week 4 of our 5-week series on tabletop role-playing games. And this week, we have a great interview with Peter Martin, the former co-host of Saving the Game podcast. And we'll talk all about faith and collaborative storytelling in role-playing games. But before we get to that, I do have a couple bits of scripture for you. Let's start with 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. And Matthew 5:14 through 16. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand. And it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Now let's get right to the interview with Peter Martin. Hey guys, I'm so excited to have Peter Martin with me today from City on a Hill Gaming, and as well, previous host of the Saving the Game podcast. Peter, so glad to have you, man.
Nice to be here.
I just wanted to take some time and, kind of sit down and talk to you about role-playing games. And I know that's something you have done a lot of. You've done a lot of podcasting about it, and you've played a lot over the years, correct?
I certainly have, yeah. I started gaming 22, 23 years ago at this point. So yeah, I've been at this for a while. It's been my primary hobby for at least 15 of those years. It's yeah. I have a lot to say and a lot of experience with the hobby. Yes.
Very cool. Well, tell us now, you say you got into it about 22 years ago. Tell us, how did you get into role-playing games?
Okay, so this is kind of an interesting story. So I first got into role-playing games when I found a copy of the GURPS Basic Set in a used bookstore back when I was in high school. I picked that up and read through it, and I was like, this sounds really cool. They had like a choose your own adventure kind of solo adventure in the back. Played through that. Was never actually able to get a game going while I was in high school. None of my friends were all that interested in playing GURPS. There was still a lot of stigma around D&D at the time. This was kind of still back in the 2nd edition days, tail end of it. So after I graduated, I managed to find a gaming group that was playing GURPS quite a ways away from me, probably about an hour and 15 minutes drive or so. Gamed with them for a while. They were nice enough people, but it wasn't a super great fit in terms of like the kind of content they wanted to have in their gaming and stuff, so I kind of fell away from that. Didn't do anything for a while, and then some old friends from high school started up a 3rd edition D&D game when that came out in 2000. Played in that for a while, quite a while actually, a couple of years I want to say, and then branched out from there, and then have kind of been back and forth with different gaming groups and stuff throughout my entire adult life.
Nice. Well, hey, before
I've
you go any further, you threw out the name GURPS, and I
yes.
actually played a lot of GURPS when I was in college, so this would be early '90s. So just because some of my audience may not be familiar with that, that is the GURPS is short for Generic Universal Role-Playing Game System.
Yep.
Correct?
I'm not sure game is in there. I think it's just generic universal role-playing system. But yeah.
Role-playing system. Yes,
yeah,
you are correct.
It's what it sounds like. It's a modular RPG that was put out by Steve Jackson Games. I will also say, like, I haven't played GURPS in many years. I have a huge collection of GURPS books.
Yes.
And I will never sell them. Like, they are the writing and editorial standards, particularly kind of in that GURPS 3rd edition era, was so incredibly high that I have actually used a GURPS book as a jumping off point for a serious, like, early college research paper. And I also love them as reference materials.
That was definitely something that GURPS had going for it that a lot of games didn't. It was so generic that you could literally do anything you wanted in your story, and there was probably a supplemental book to help you along the way.
Yeah, and like I said, the writing and editorial standards were incredibly high. Like, Steve Jackson really wanted to make sure stuff was well researched before he'd print it. So you'll get a GURPS book and open it up, and they were about 128 pages long for a bit of the run. But like the last 3 pages of that is a bibliography. Like if you're looking at, like, say, GURPS Martial Arts or GURPS Age of Napoleon or something where there's a heavy grounding in reality, they really made the writers do their research and stuff, so they hold up better than a lot of other RPG supplements of, kind of a contemporaneous era. Like I said, they're great as research materials. I've pulled out like martial arts or biotech or that sort of thing as I've been working on other campaigns in completely different systems just for the ideas and stuff. So,
and you have another personal connection with GURPS, correct?
Yeah. Okay. So the very first time I ever got anything that I wrote published was Special Agent Thomas Johnson in GURPS Monsters. I've also got a magic item in GURPS Magic Items 3. It's like a cursed revolver that shoots like flaming skull spirit things. And then I think that's it for the stuff that I got printed in GURPS. And then it was quite a while after that before I got anything printed again. I've got a couple of short stories in the Sojourn anthology, and lately I've been doing a bit of third-party publishing 5e design, but that's obviously a little different. So
yeah. So talk to me a little bit about your kind of your faith journey here along with gaming, because I know we have a Christian audience, and and you're a believer. So how do you kind of blend those two in your life?
Okay, so I started out in a fairly conservative evangelical tradition, the Evangelical Free Church, if you're familiar with that.
I am.
And my parents participated in the Satanic Panic, basically. I wasn't allowed to watch Ghostbusters because it had occult elements when I was growing up. I mean, it was pretty strict. They and I have both mellowed significantly since then. Obviously, since I did 8.5 years of doing a Christian RPG podcast, and we referenced D&D extensively. But like back when I was, first looking at the stuff, like D&D was really suspect. I remember that Carmen song, Witch's Invitation, where he mentioned like a Dungeons and Dragons game in like this, occult figure's house when he visited and stuff. And it took a while for me to kind of like realize, no, this is really just fiction. It's a pastiche of all these different fantasy properties. There's nothing inherently bad here. Yes, there are, like demons and devils in the game. and their primary role is for you to stick a sword in them.
Yes. Yes.
They're these evil forces to be fought against and overcome. They're not something that you're really supposed to be, looking at in a favorable light. Now, obviously, people run all kinds of different games with D&D and other role-playing systems and stuff, and the content at any given gaming table is going to be heavily dependent on the people sitting there. But it took a lot of things in my life that I've mellowed on. It actually took some exposure to the thing for me to realize, okay, what I've been. You've got a technology element to your podcast, so you're familiar with the term FUD, right? Fear,
Yes.
uncertainty, and doubt.
Yes.
There was a lot of FUD around any kind of geek culture when I was growing up, and I even like comic books were a little bit suspect. I was really into those when I was in high school, and I kind of went back and forth with my folks about that, and there was some conflict about that. Now they're watching MCU movies on their own and stuff, and I talk about them I'll probably talk about some of those when I'm visiting with my dad tomorrow, actually, for Father's Day. I can't really point to specific moments where it was like, some kind of a light bulb came on, but it was this gradual process over the years of, okay, here's what's really in here, because if you've talked to Derek the Geek Preacher White or listened to him, like his mom went through some of that stuff where there was like all this, FUD around D&D books, and when he was out, she like grabbed his stuff and looked through it. She's like, this is all fiction, it's fine, they're not actually casting real spells or anything in here. So
right.
And then, once I'd kind of gone through that process, it's like, okay, well, this is a fun thing to do. It's a really fun thing to do. It's the actual activity itself is very inexpensive. The acquisition of a role-playing library is significantly more expensive, but like the act of just, sitting around a table, eating some snacks and rolling dice and stuff is, you're going to pay for the food, that you eat during that. And if you're gaming online like I do now, because my current gaming group is very diffuse, you're already paying for internet access. So yeah, there's not much of a cost associated there either. And it's a nice way of it shores up friendships. It fosters creative thought. It lets you sometimes process through like stuff that you're dealing with, even on a subconscious level. We talked about mental health a fair amount on Saving the Game, and role-playing games, as long as you've got a nice separation between, fantasy and reality, are good for your mental health. I'm firmly convinced of that, especially after 8.5 years of doing the podcast. So sorry, I've kind of drifted from what you were asking me about earlier.
That is quite all right. So how do you, you play games with other game masters, and you've done some GMing as well, correct?
Yep. Yeah.
How do you work your faith into a game, either as a player or as a GM? And is there a difference?
Not really. Okay, so let me tell you a story. I apparently changed the whole demeanor of the City on a Hill podcast because I had some anxiety. So Ryan Felton, and I'm going to tell you, Ryan Felton invited me on as a guest character on City on a Hill. And it's like, I knew that this, podcast was family friendly as one of its key components.
Right.
Now, in my personal life, am very family friendly to interact with. I rarely curse. My sense of humor is so clean it squeaks. I'm just, I'm very wholesome in my interactions and stuff. But, with this thing, it was I had all of this anxiety of it. It's okay, I need to make sure that I play the most upstanding, virtuous character. And I play very good characters to begin with. I really like straightforward heroes with pure motivations and stuff, but I turned that dial all the way up to 11 for Desilov. I'm looking through my, my 5th edition books, and I was like, okay, I'm going to make an Oath of the Ancients paladin because there's all these tenets about kindness and mercy and forgiveness and stuff in there. So that's really good. And then I'm going to make him a furbolg because that also ties into the nature, flavor, and they're also kind of good aligned. And I'm sitting here like, I'm going to grab the virtue of mercy with both hands and hang on as tight as I possibly can. So there's in that first episode I was in, there's like a fight scene and he's very reluctant in that, although he's very formidable. And then later there's this, another one where it's like, there's this thing with these bandits and it's like, there's, we beat a bunch of them down and then, he talks to this one and he's like, how would your father feel about you following this? And he like heals the guy and sends him on his way. And I guess like after that initial play session, a bunch of the other players were like, oh, wow, we can play like that, and I don't think I know like from season 2 where Grant, Jenny and I were part of the regular cast. And in season 3, I don't think anything that's sapient and can talk has died in City on a Hill episode since.
I have listened to maybe all of the episodes of City on a Hill. I might have missed some, but I think you're probably right about that.
Yeah, like we in season 2 in particular,
you guys are so reluctant to kill anything.
Strong, like really, like zero body count policy. Like we killed some giant wasps and stuff, but it's like that's a killer insect. You can't reason with it. Like it's gonna sting you to death if you don't squish it, But like anything that can talk, anything that thinks, anything that has a face, basically, is just like, nope. If you force us to fight, we'll knock you out and be like, have you learned your lesson yet? Because we can knock you unconscious again, and we can have this conversation when you come to again. So yeah, that was kind of cool. But even in like the games where there's a little bit more of an edge to stuff, I still really try and play characters that are pro-social, that are kind, that are merciful. I wrote extensively about my cleric Lambert in Grant's Colony game when I was doing the podcast, and that was a really interesting character to play because he became the moral compass of the party that he was in, because the other two characters were chaotic neutral and he was neutral good. But he also like became like a surrogate father figure to the rogue, which was kind of interesting. Yeah, I kind of based him on some of like the real life pastors that I've known that are really decent, kind people, and used that as a touchstone. And then obviously, he drifted in play a little bit from that as I went through and the world changed him and stuff. But that was one of the things that I stuck with there. It was interesting too, because Grant gave me space to really kind of like play his internal struggles with like the violence that he had to do and stuff. There was an incident where the party had to go and like rescue another group of colonists that had been on a second ship. They'd gotten separated in the storm like before the first session and stuff. And the fort was under attack from gnolls, and the gnolls were as bad as they are in standard D&D lore, like, demon worshipping, horrible, like, they would eat people and stuff. These were bad, these were not sympathetic at all. And they fought through and killed a whole bunch of them, and they got everybody on the ships and, went back and everything was fine. Hurrah, the hero saved the day, right? Lambert went and found the other cleric in the colony, gave him his confession, and then went off and cried for a while because he'd had to do so much killing. And so it's like, that was the first time I'd really done that with a character. And it's like, violence really like messes real world people up. So sometimes it's good to acknowledge that. I just this week finished listening to the 6th episode of Supernova in the East, which is the hardcore history series about the war in the Pacific. And just hearing about like some of the veterans' experiences there, like, and just how like mentally and emotionally scarred they were by just like the savage fighting that happened in that theater. It's like, keep some of that stuff in mind as you're creating player characters. You don't have to put so much in where it takes the fun out of the game for you, but like, keep in mind, if you're playing a game that's got some more depth of character and stuff in it, that violence changes people, and not just people who are subjected to it, but people who do it. We're not really, mentally wired up to like hurting each other in most cases. And so if you're in a situation where you're like in a war or some other kind of a combat situation, there's going to be some effects from that. So that's one of the things that I do there. I tend to play. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, before you go on, you've kind of alluded to something that maybe some of our audience has never really thought about before.
Okay.
I probably a lot of our audience thinks if they haven't delved into role-playing games before, or if they've only played really the term crunchy games before, they may never have run into a situation where they're having the kind of conversations that you're referring to while you're playing a game. Can you talk to me a little bit more about, this idea of collaborative storytelling versus I'm just going to roll a bunch of dice and say what I'm doing?
Sure. Okay. So I'm gonna lead off by saying there's nothing wrong with enjoying like the tactical and crunchy side of the game. I definitely enjoy like a good, tactical battle in an RPG. Some of my favorite video games are things like XCOM. Real quick here, pop open Steam. XCOM 2, 591.7 hours of play in that one. One of my favorite games of all time. Another earlier entry in my video gaming history was Jagged Alliance 2, released back in 1998. It's a very similar type of game, tactical squad battles, have many hours in that too. But yeah, like there's basically... There's what are called story games out there, which are things like Drama System, Powered by the Apocalypse, kind of fits in the middle territory between standard like GURPS or D&D, very heavily mechanical, and games that are like pure story. And there's a lot of emphasis on telling a story that is interesting and is compelling to the people around the table. And it's an interesting process because everybody is both an audience member and an author, right? Like,
yep.
So you've got to really kind of cooperate with each other. Collaborative is the term that you used, and it's very appropriate. You want to be like, even if your individual characters are in conflict with each other, the people around the table should be working together to make an interesting story. You'll actually run into that a lot in popular actual plays. Like I know I've caught an episode or two of Critical Role. There's so much of that out there, and I just don't have the time for a weekly 4-hour podcast. But I've listened to a few of them, and they definitely do some more storytelling. Their characters all have unique voices. Right. They have relationships with each other. That sort of thing, if you can get it into your games, if you've got a group that you trust enough, is really good. But I want to come back to something else about your initial question that I kind of shot past. And I tend to play religious characters in games. I tend to play clerics, paladins. Even my bard in the current game that I'm playing has a couple levels of paladin and is has got some religious faith. I don't always try and... I don't try and shove like my real world faith into a fantasy world, but I will usually try and play a character whose values line up with my real world religious values, if that makes sense. So, kindness, mercy, taking care of the less fortunate, chastity, that sort of thing. And just, play these characters that are upright, have faith and devotion to something higher and greater than themselves. I don't, like I said, I don't feel compelled to break a setting with it, to jam my real world faith in there, because at that point you're just doing something allegorical, right? I mean, in the Chronicles of Narnia, they never call Aslan Jesus, even though that's clearly what that lion is an analog to. So I like to get that in there. And then kind of to go to your second question that you asked me about, I try to play collaboratively. I try and share the spotlight. I try and treat the other players around the table with respect. On the GMing side of things, I do all of that. Plus, I'm a big advocate for things like safety tools. Have you encountered that at all, or
I'm
are you
familiar with the
those?
idea because of saving the game. It
Okay.
wasn't something I was aware of when I was in high school or college. I think there were maybe some unspoken ideas because we were so familiar with each other. And well, in college, we were actually roommates. So, at any moment we could break into a game session.
Right.
And we knew each other really, really well. So we
Oh, those
knew,
halcyon days of youth.
yeah. So we knew what buttons you shouldn't push because it was going to cause a problem later in the evening. So talk to me a little bit more about that because maybe some of our audience is not familiar with it.
Okay, so I first heard about safety tools way back in the early 2000s when I was listening to the Sons of Kryos podcast. And it was one of those things where I'd run into stuff that would constitute like a safety violation for me in that first GURPS game that I played.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, I
And
heard
what do you
about this
mean
and I
when
was
you
like,
say a safety violation?
I'm getting there.
Okay.
And it was kind of like, oh my gosh, there's formal tools for avoiding this kind of thing, because that kind of sucked all the air out of it. So a safety violation is when something comes up in a game that somebody around the table, like outside the game, just does not want to be confronted with. To use a relatively tame example, like harm to domestic animals like dogs and cats is a big one for a lot of people. Like, we have these pets at home. We don't want to hear a story about a cat getting hit with an arrow or something. I mean,
you actually have a story you shared on Saving the Game about that.
Oh boy, howdy do I ever. So
do you mind sharing it?
Not at all, because I've shared it publicly before. So I was at Fear the Con, which is a convention that was put on just about annually by Fear the Boot, which is kind of how me and my Saving the Game hosts know each other.
Which is another
podcast.
RPG podcast.
Yeah. Once again, like when you're talking to me, it's just RPGs and faith all the way down. Like this is two biggest pillars of my identity.
That is perfectly fine. That's why we're here.
Exactly. So I'm there. I'm playing this convention game, and it's Pugmire, which is like this game of anthropomorphic dogs and cats, run with the 5th edition D&D rules. I've been hacked a little bit. Your different. Like kind of your quote unquote race is different breeds of dog that have been uplifted into these humanoid forms and yada yada. So we're playing and we're investigating this thing, and there's like this cave full of cats, like anthropomorphic cats, and they're having some kind of a celebration. There's some guards posted, and the barbarian next to me walks up and just cuts down one of the guards without a word. Doesn't try to negotiate, doesn't try to figure out what's going on, just, oh, look, combat encounter. I had just lost my real world cat a couple of months ago. This was the first cat that my wife and I had ever had. This fluffy, like Norwegian forest cat mix named Storm that was just this ball of affection. Really loved this animal, really sweet little guy. I couldn't take it. I tilted. I tried to negotiate with the guy, like in person, and that wasn't getting anywhere. So I stood up to leave, and the GM was like, whoa. Let me fix this. And we kind of got stuff processed there, but that was definitely a safety violation. It was just something that set me off in the moment that I really didn't feel like dealing with. Cause once again, I just lost a pet, and I don't like murder hobo-y kind of conduct in games to begin with. And this was like a combination of that and then the lost pet thing. And it was just like, nope, something in my brain tripped. It was like, this is too much right now. I can't deal. So much credit to the GM. He did do a pretty good job of bringing things back around. That particular cat wound up surviving. Our cleric got him up with like Spare the Dying or something like that. It all worked out. But yeah, that's a really good example of safety violation where it's like, something has happened in the game where it's affected the person who's playing the game, and the game has suddenly become not enjoyable. And that's really what you're trying to avoid with safety tools, right? I mean, a lot of the time the products that are out there or the tools that are out there make reference to people with like these deeply traumatic things, like having been abused as a child or something like that. And it's like, this can really trigger somebody and set them off in like a really bad way, trigger some kind of like a serious mental health episode. That can happen. Sure, it can. Most of the time when you have a safety violation, what's actually going to happen is two people at the table or more are going to get into an argument that's going to spill out of the game, is going to result in hard feelings, or somebody's just going to completely disengage and unplug from the game and stop having fun and maybe leave the group. Those are more realistic outcomes. And it's, that's what you're trying to avoid with safety tools. So just real quick, the two that I like the most are lines and veils, which lets you kind of cut content off from the game entirely. So a line
what's the
is,
difference
I don't
between
even...
What's the difference between a line
is,
and a veil?
A line is, I don't want this mentioned in the game at all. Any kind of sexual violence is a line for me, and would be for, I would imagine, 99% or more of your audience.
Yes, I would agree.
So a veil is, it's okay if this, occurs in the game world, but I don't want it, like, quote unquote, on screen. You can reference this having happened before or something like that, but I don't want to see it, There
was a massacre, but we don't want to hear the gory details.
Exactly. Like, we've come to this town. It's quiet. Really good example of kind of a way of like a veil or something. Have you seen that old Mel Gibson movie, The Patriot?
Yes.
Okay. When like the aftermath of like the evil British like guy herding everybody into the church and burning it down, where they just come, they find the town is silent, and then the church is burnt down, and they find a couple of like personal effects in there, and they kind of put it together. That would be kind of a veil sort of a thing. Yeah. Like
I was actually thinking, Anakin and the younglings.
That too. Any kind of a fade to black,
Yes.
There was a scene in Grant's Saturday game where some people got killed by a revenant, and it's like they are led off screen and never seen again. It's like, okay, we know what happens, but we don't need all the gory details.
Yes.
So
lines and veils. And you said there was another tool that you like?
Yep, the X card. So
okay.
I refer to this is not like a term of art in the industry, but I refer to these as filters and breaks. The X card is basically you've got a card in front of you with an X on it, or there's one in the middle of the table. And if something comes up in the game that you're just not ready to deal with, you either hold up the one that you've got or you tap the one in the middle of the table. And play stops, and it's like, okay, what do we need to do to make this okay? So lines are filters, which filter content out of the game to begin with, and then the X card is a set of breaks where it's like if something comes up anyways, stop. And I like to use both in my games. I've been running a game for some friends that I know through the podcast on Sundays for like a year or something now. And I spent a good chunk of like, have you discussed like what a session 0 is?
We haven't yet. That's actually something that I need to discuss at some point with someone. So you might be a great person to go ahead and do that with.
Okay. So, this is the sort of thing that you bring up in session 0. A session 0 is before you actually start playing the game. You have like a session where everybody who's going to be playing gets together. A lot of the time you make your characters together, so everybody knows kind of like how these characters know each other, why they adventure together, that sort of thing. That's called the group template. That was come up with by Fear the Boot. It's a really good thing to do. 99% of the time, that's a really good way to like get a game going. Because if you start off with
the D&D game that I started playing back in January with some friends online, we did kind of a session 0 through chat. We had all those conversations of, who knows who and who's related to who, because at the time we couldn't actually get together yet. But we did very similar things, who already knows who and why do you know them and how would that even work? And why does that make sense for this group? Those kind of things.
Yeah. And that's the group template, and that's a really good way to do it, because what's the alternative, right? Everybody makes their characters in a vacuum. You all meet in a tavern, and you have like 1 to 7 sessions of just hackneyed trying to figure out why these people are still hanging out together, even though they've got totally different motivations and backstories, and it becomes a nightmare. And sometimes you never can get the group to gel, and it just falls apart.
Yeah.
So, like, do the group template. Get everybody, figure out why the player characters are together and why they adventure together and stuff. Hammer out any kind of conflicts, figure out how much of a role you want those to play in the game, and then also talk about things like scheduling and your lines and veils and, that sort of thing, so that once you actually start playing for real in session 1, you have a nice smooth experience and your game has a better tendency to hang together, because I will tell you, adult life is murderous on games.
Yes.
I have had so many absolutely incredible RPG campaigns die because my kid got sick, and, then this other person had like chronic migraines, and this other person had to work a bunch. And it's like, it's been 4 months since we played because everybody keeps canceling for totally valid, responsible adult reasons that absolutely take precedence over the game.
Mm-hmm.
But you lose all the momentum. You forget what you're doing. It's like, okay, we should probably start something new at this point, The gaming group survives, the game itself dies.
Yes.
And that is something that is going to happen over and over and over again throughout your adult life. If you're over the age of 27 or so and you're gaming, accept that this is going to happen to you more than you would like.
Yes.
Yeah. So, oh boy, where did we even start this?
We were talking. Well, we were talking about the X card, but we were talking about the safety tools.
Yeah. So,
and honestly, I think that's a legitimate safety tool. When we start a game, we have to kind of agree that life comes first, the game comes second. And that's something to be aware of, and don't get mad when somebody else's kid is sick and you don't get to play because somebody else can't be there.
Yeah. You can be disappointed. You will be. But
yes,
the trick is not to hold it against the other person.
Exactly.
Like my Saturday gaming group, which is my old Saving the Game co-hosts, Grant's wife, and a mutual friend of ours, has been together for, a really long time. It either like predates the podcast or it postdates it by just a little bit. I can't remember. It was around the same time. Jenny and the other friend got added later. A different friend that was with us at the beginning left, and it's been, Grant, Chrissy, and me, and then 2 other players for, quite some time. I love gaming with those people, but everybody's an adult and there are so many responsibilities and so many like health issues and, like scheduling problems and stuff and the other thing is too, is you have to like respect that sometimes people will be like, look, if this was my actual day job, I would force myself to do this because I'm getting paid and I need to support my family. But I got 4 hours of sleep last night because like the neighbors like had a chunk of their gutters collapse and it like clattered outside my window and woke me up, and I just never did get back to sleep because of the huge adrenaline surge, or our air conditioner broke and it was too hot last night and I slept fitfully or whatever. I can't game. I don't have enough spoons. I'm not there for it. I just threw another term out. Are you familiar with spoon theory?
Yeah, only because of your show.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let me introduce you to another term. Spoons is basically mental resources.
Yes.
It comes from somebody with some kind of chronic illness talking to her friend about how much in the terms of mental resources it takes to do everything. It's like, they were sitting in a cafe, so she ran around and grabbed a bunch of spoons, and it's like, okay, so like, brushing your teeth and taking a shower and putting your clothes on in the morning to go to work takes this many spoons. And it's like, when you're fully healthy and you don't have, any kind of problems from before, you have this abundant pile of spoons and you can do everything that you want to do in the day. You can get yourself, all of your grooming and everything. You can go to work, you can have a productive day, you can come home, you can, engage with your family, you can engage with your hobbies, that sort of thing. If you're chronically ill or you're sleep deprived or you're suffering from anxiety or depression or some other, issue or something like that, it takes spoons away from you. And so you have to ration the mental energy that you do have in order to get the really important stuff done. And a lot of the time, gaming rightly, because it's a hobby, comes pretty far down that list, and people can run through their mental resources and just be physically and or emotionally exhausted and just not in a good place to game. Because while doing role-playing games is a really fun, engaging hobby and is good for your mental health over the long haul, if you are just spent, you're not going to have a good time. You have to be in a place where you've got enough energy to think creatively, to interact with other people socially. So sometimes, people hit a wall and they just can't. And that happens in adulthood. And once again, it happens more when people start working professional jobs and having, children and having sick, parents and stuff. It stacks up.
Absolutely. Well, I love talking to you about all of this stuff. So I just want to pelt you with a couple of quick questions.
Sure.
And maybe they have long answers. And that's okay if they do.
A lot of things have long answers with me, as you probably figured out.
So you have played for a long time, and I know you've done con games as well. Is there a system that you're like, this is the system that I absolutely, if there was only one system I could ever play again, this is the one I would play?
Savage Worlds, maybe, because it's so versatile. And the thing is, it's not my favorite system, but if I'm going to be confined to a single system for my entire life, I'm going to go with something that's highly adaptable. And so that's probably going to be Savage Worlds, because it handles different genres well. It's not as fiddly on the character creation side as something like GURPS or the Hero system are, which means that it fits better into adult life. It's got a wide library of supporting material, and like the exploding dice mechanic is kind of fun. So I think if I had to confine myself to a single system for all of my role-playing gaming for the rest of my life, I'd probably pick that one.
Now, you said it's not your favorite. What is your favorite?
These days, probably what's going to be my favorite system isn't released yet. EN Publishing is working on a system called Level Up Advanced 5e, where it takes like kind of the general framework of 5th edition D&D and adds maneuvers and reworks the classes and adds more to the social and exploration pillars. It's still largely backwards compatible, but it adds additional layers of stuff that helps with like the social mechanics and the exploration side of things. And I'm also working on it. I'm part of the general design team for it. So there's like a 2-tiered design structure. There's the lead designers who are working on like all of the really heavy important stuff. They're the ones that are like developing some of the new systems that plug into it. They're reworking the base classes, that sort of thing. I'm what's called a general designer. We're there to help the lead designers out. So it's like, hey, this chunk of these things out of the book need to be rewritten. You've got X number of words to work with, write these up, that sort of thing. So I'm being a little cagey about what I've actually done because I'm under an NDA. I can say that I'm part of the team and that I'm a general designer, but I cannot tell you what I've worked on specifically. What I can say is there's a lot of stuff in there that I am really excited about. There are some changes that they made to the way that certain assumptions work in actually, I'll give you one that is publicly released so I can talk about it. So you know how in regular 5th edition D&D, you've got your race, your background, and your class, and then a subclass, right? So in Advanced 5e Level Up, what EN Publishing has done is they have taken the idea of race and split it into ancestry, which is your biological traits. So, like, if you're a Dragonborn, this would cover, like, the fact that you've got a breath weapon that matches your draconic ancestry and stuff like that. Scales, dark vision if you're a dwarf, or that sort of thing. And then culture, which is the environment that you grew up in. So, one of the things that this does is it allows people who are biologically one thing but have been raised in a different society to be created. And that makes for some interesting possibilities. Are you familiar with Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels at all?
Yes.
Carrot Iron Founderson is a human ancestry dwarf culture. That's one of my favorite examples of that. Is it's it's in a popular thing. It's like, this is a guy who is a human. He had two human parents, not an ounce of dwarf genetic material in him, but he was raised from the time when he was itty bitty among dwarves. So he's got a lot of like the dwarven knowledge and that sort of a thing as part of his makeup. And I love that system. They didn't invent that. It was created by some other various developers, but it's baked into the system at like the most fundamental level. And I love that idea because
that sounds like a really nice mechanic.
It really is. Okay, so this is another thing that I often say, like, there's a lot of stuff out there that's designed with like sensitivity in mind, right? You're trying to decouple like role-playing games from stuff that feels a little bit like real-world racism or colonialism or that sort of a thing. People have a wide variety of different opinions as to how much that's necessary, how much of it is, well, it's just a game, whatever. I will tell you this, a lot of the time, the stuff that's designed to create more sensitivity has really good knock-on effects for like just the options that you get when you're creating characters. And being a bit more new school in my RPG sensibilities, give me all the options I can have, like give me the option to make like a human that was raised among or spent a large amount of time among elves. By the way, that would also be Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. Human with a huge amount of like elven influence. And, because of that, you can create characters that are kind of like these fictional characters that you've enjoyed from various intellectual properties because they've given you the opportunity to make like, I was born as this, but I spent a bunch of time among this. And that can be positive or negative, like for Carrot Iron Founderson and Aragorn, it was positive. Carrot was raised by, loving dwarven parents, and the elves in Lord of the Rings are pretty awesome and people like spending time around them. That's true. Established early. So that's good. But I mean, it could be a bad situation where, your character is one thing and was, lived on the streets and was kind of quote unquote, like part of this society, but was treated badly and didn't fit in. And, you could do that too.
Or you never learned your racial language, and now you are trying to exist in this world where everybody thinks you fit in, but you don't.
Yeah, like you're a dwarf and you don't speak a single word of Dwarven because you were raised among like halflings a couple counties over, and it's like, well, at least I wasn't bonking my head on the ceiling, but it's like, at least I got to, the short people. I was short too, and that worked out. But it would have been so much worse if I'd been human. Oh man, I'd have back problems that would be with me to this day.
I have flashbacks of the movie that. Elf now.
Oh boy.
So other than that, is there one mechanic that you have seen in a game that you were like, you know what, that is just really cool and weird and unusual, something that's different, some different game mechanic that you're like, that's really cool.
Are you familiar with the Fate system at all?
Somewhat, yes.
Okay, so aspects from Fate are like that. They are like, aspects are this nebulous kind of thing that is important to your character, but it can be just about anything, and it can be positive or negative, and it'll affect different scenes that you're in, depending on what it's like, for the time. So, let's say like stoic, for instance, is a good one. It's a common like heroic trait. Mm-hmm. So you've got a character who's very stoic. So in cases where you need to just be really tough and gritty, and like you're on this long grueling march and you don't have enough food and that sort of thing, it's like it'll keep your morale up. You can just like soldier on and just be like, I'm stoic, I'm like Batman, I will deal. But And using Batman again, like you get into a situation where one of your companions is having a really tough time emotionally and stuff. You don't have the tools to deal with that. You're not as empathetic as you could be. And so, you've got, this is now a problem. So I like aspects from Fate a lot. They're a very portable mechanic too. You can drop them into other systems without really hurting anything. You got to do a little bit of hacking to make them work with, how benefits and drawbacks work in whatever system that you're playing with. But I think aspects are great. They can be tied to other player characters. Those are really good. I'll give you a second one too that's from something more recent. There's a Powered by the Apocalypse game called Impulse Drive that's out there that my former co-host and current friend Grant from Saving the Game is a huge fan of. He and another gaming group that he's in that I'm not in are actually using it to run a Star Wars game right now. And it's designed to play that kind of science fiction, right? So Star Wars, Mass Effect, Firefly would be really good for that. Any of these kind of group of adventurers on a spaceship kind of a thing. Instead of having stats like strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma like you do in D&D, you have approaches like brash or cautious or that sort of a thing. And so your character is really good at doing things, if you've got a bunch of ranks in brash, you're really good at kicking in the door and, shouting at, the enemies and everybody down on the ground, freeze, or, like the Leroy Jenkins kind of approach. But if you're in if you're in a situation where you have to be measured and careful, like a heist or something like that, you're going to struggle. And I think that's really cool because it's that's how a lot of the time that sort of thing plays out in fiction, right? Like I couldn't tell you the difference between for instance, in Mass Effect, Garrus's dexterity score as opposed to Tally's. And I don't care, but Garrus is a Turian and he's got a law enforcement background and he's got kind of a military background and stuff. So he's going to approach things in one way. And Tally is this engineer from the migrant fleet from the Quarians, and she's going to approach things in a different way. And that's cool. That's the distinguishing difference between those characters. So I think that's somewhat portable too, and is also really neat and something that I really enjoyed when I saw it. Nice. For just a real quick, fire off the exploding dice in Savage Worlds are really fun, and more systems should use them, but it breaks the math in things like D&D, so you can't.
So last question for you.
All right.
If somebody has never been into role-playing games at all, and they want to get involved somehow, where do you tell people to start?
Start with a group of friends that are also interested. That is the ideal place to go, because what you want is that that grounding of pre-existing relationships the first time that you do it, because you're especially you can do it two ways. If you've got a bunch of friends that are already gaming and they're willing to take on another player, join the group, learn from them. That's a good way to get in. If you've got a bunch of friends that are, interested or at least, willing to give it a try, and none of you have gamed, you can all learn together, and that's good. I don't really recommend the approach of find a public game at a game store and stuff unless you're really invested in learning this and you have no other option, because you have no idea what you're going to be getting and that sort of a thing. And a lot of the time, you'll run into a situation like Kyle from the MinMax podcast describes early on when he was learning the Magic the Gathering. He went to a game store and played with some people there and just got crushed, absolutely flattened. This person had this tuned up modern or standard deck or something, and he was playing with a starter deck that he'd thrown a couple of additional cards into, and he wasn't able to do anything. The other guy just squashed him basically, and kind of gave him this pitying look of, oh, my sweet summer child, you have no idea what you've walked into and stuff. Because RPGs are not generally competitive, you won't get quite that experience, but the entire table will run circles around you. People will get impatient. You'll have a bad time unless you get a really accommodating table. And I don't like the odds of that in just a group of randos at a game store, especially because those games tend to be somewhat fluid. The people are experience with gaming, but they don't have a regular group. Sometimes that's because they don't have the social skills to get along with a group, and this is how they play. So you'll get people that are doing stuff that would possibly be safety violations or are just really obnoxious or that sort of thing. I mean, there are plenty of stories of people finding really nice gaming groups at game stores and stuff. It's not, I'm trying to advise caution while also not being totally condescending towards people that play that way, because there are people that do that and enjoy it. There are organized play organizers that work incredibly hard and cultivate a community and that sort of a thing. But for your absolute first time, find some people that you know and like and get along with already and game with them if you can do it at all possible. The other option, if that's not available to you and there's a gaming convention in your area, go play a con game. Because a lot of the time, the people sitting down to play this con game are in this con game to learn a new system. That is part of the reason why they are sitting there. So that can be a good way to go too. And that's in particular a good way to get exposure to less mainstream systems that you are interested in but haven't played. I have played so many things that way at Fear the Con. I've played Rises and Fate and Hollow Earth Expeditions and more stuff that I'm sure I'm forgetting, because it's like, hey, I'm going to run a one-shot of this at the con. Whoever's interested in Burning Wheel, actually, was another one that I'd wanted to try for a long time and never gotten the chance. Like, that's a good way of trying out a new system. So that can be a good way too.
Fantastic. Well, hey, Peter, it has been great having you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Tell everybody where they can find you.
Well, for the most part, you can't, because I'm not really on social media anymore.
Well, where can they find your stuff?
Yeah. So the Saving the Game podcast, which we wrapped up early this year, is at stgcast.org. If you want to hear something that I'm still contributing to, go listen to the actual play podcast that Ryan Felton does, City on a Hill Gaming. I am one of the players in that and have been for the past couple of seasons. And if you're looking for like the actual game writing that I've been doing, I've been a contributor to EN World's ENsider article series for a while. That's a Patreon thing, but I think a few of them might have found their way to Drive Through RPG at this point. And keep an eye out for that Level Up Advanced 5e thing sometime this fall when it goes on Kickstarter.
We'll definitely keep an eye on that. And I will put all those links down in the show notes. Peter, it's been great having you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
It was great talking to Peter Martin today about role-playing games, and I put links to the shows that he's on down in the show notes, so go check those out. I've also included other links to resources and products that you might be interested in. Now it's time to announce our winner from last week's +3 to Charisma.com giveaway and talk about this week's grand prize giveaway. Each week, our sponsor +3 to Charisma.com will have a special prize for one lucky winner. To enter, go to +3 to Charisma.com/+3 giveaway. Winners are chosen at random on Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. Pacific time from all entries that have been received by that time, and only will be announced on the podcast. So don't forget to listen in and see if you've won. The final week, we'll have our grand prize. Prizes can be shipped worldwide, no purchase necessary, must be 12 years or older to enter, void where prohibited. The giveaway is not sponsored or affiliated in any way with Facebook or Instagram. And the winner of the tabletop gaming package is Philip Cochran. Philip Cochran. So Philip, please send an email to +3 to charisma@gmail.com to claim your prize using the same email you used to enter the contest. Put CNU podcast winner in the subject line and include your contact information and your shipping address. This week's +3 to charisma.com giveaway is our grand prize, a special GM chest package. It's going to include the Squire Compact GM chest, 2 GM screens with magnetic strips and stands, a set of magnetic push pins, 2 3D printed dice trays, a travel dice tower, and a set of 16mm polyhedral dice, because we all know having great dice is a must for any gamer. So go to +3 to charisma.com patreon.com/plus3 giveaway to enter, and we'll announce the winner of our grand prize next week on the show. Well, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to go like, subscribe, click all those buttons down below. We really appreciate it. And it really does help other people find us when you do. And you can find all of our social links, our online store, and links to our YouTube channel at ChristianNerdsUnite.com. And while you're there, check out the support tab. We would love to have you as one of our Patreons. Before you go, I want to leave you with this blessing. Lord God, we rejoice in your greatness and power, your gentleness and love, your mercy and justice. Enable us by your Spirit to honor you in our thoughts and our words and our actions, and to serve you in every aspect of our lives through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. We'll see you next week.